This is Keith Helwig from Cops Corrections Videos. It's the day after Veterans Day, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank some of the veterans that I've worked with through the course of the years. Now, when I started in corrections in 1977, it wasn't unusual to work with World War II vets. Off the top of my head, I can recall three of them that I worked with. There was a man we called T-Bone. T-Bone's real name was Bob Friday. Bob had been an Army veteran in World War II, and we carpooled together, and he'd fought in the Battle of the Bulge. His nickname was T-Bone because he made the statement to himself while he was in the war that if he survived it, he was going to have a T-bone dinner every day or every week for the rest of his life. I don't know if he fulfilled that or not. He certainly was big enough. He was about 6'6" and weighed about 300 pounds. Another individual was Captain Art Schmidt. Art Schmidt was my first supervisor. Art was just the opposite of T-Bone. Art was about 5'5" and probably weighed about 140 pounds. His favorite war story was that he was scared to death of snakes, and when he was stationed down south, he'd occasionally find a snake in his sleeping bag that somebody put there just to get a rise out of him. Another individual I worked with who was a World War II veteran was a man named Artie Carls. Now, Artie had been in the Merchant Marines, and he was missing a hand that he'd lost in an explosion of a cargo ship. I also knew several people who were Korean War veterans. First, I can think of Charlie Millard. Charlie was one of my training officers. He was a sergeant that I worked with. He was a Korean War veteran. He was a forward field artillery observer and went through some pretty rough stuff. Another man that I carpooled with was a man named Ed Ellert. Ed was in the Navy, and he was stationed on an aircraft carrier. He was part of a recovery crew. When a plane was shot down, it was Ed's job to go out there and get the bodies out of the plane. Ed told me of a couple occasions where he would have breakfast with someone in the morning and then be recovering their body from a mangled aircraft later that day. Another man was an extremely humble man. His name was Dick Becker. Dick was a quiet man, an unassuming man. He was a good correctional officer. He'd been a Marine Scout sniper during the Korean War. So while Ed was Dick was kind, very compassionate. I'm sure he was also very deadly. Moving on from there, I started with people who had been in the Vietnam conflict. The conflict had ended just a couple of years before I'd started working. I worked with Larry Bear, who had been shot in Vietnam. Harry Mulkenthien, who was kind of a hippie and a rebel, but while he was in the Marines, he earned a Silver Star as well as numerous Purple Hearts. A man who's a friend of mine today, John McCrary. John served a couple tours of duty in Vietnam, and if you asked him what he did, he would probably tell you that he worked security for USO shows. The fact of the matter is John was in military intelligence, and he was involved in some pretty heavy-duty stuff while he was over there. Other people that served, maybe they weren't in combat, but they served there. Barry Keipel. Barry Keipel is a friend of mine today. He's a good man. He was a good officer. He served in, I believe, the National Guard and rose to the rank of sergeant. He was also a sniper for the Department of Corrections. Moving forward to today, some of the people I know, Ed Wenzel. Ed is a captain for the City Police Department who served a tour of duty in Iraq. Brian Bednarik is a police officer that I worked with in Campbellsport. He's currently a police officer, also served in Iraq. Jeffrey Faust. If you saw Jeffrey Faust, you'd know he was a Marine, and he is a Marine. He has the bearing, he has the discipline, he's a good man. These are all men that I would definitely trust my life to. Amanda Zimmerman, a young lady who served in the military and continues to serve in the military. I believe she's in the reserves, and she is a drill sergeant as well as working for the government in a civilian capacity. Kelsey Kelly. Kelsey was a young lady that worked as a correctional officer both for the state and for a county department, and prior to that had served in the military and did a tour of duty in Iraq. Brian McKenna is a man that I never met. Brian McKenna is Canadian. I know him through Facebook. He's a veteran of Afghanistan, I believe, where he was on a bomb disposal squad. Uh, he's gone through some horrible things in his life. Being from Canada, he's one of our allies. He fought for our freedom as well as his country's freedom. And I can think of numerous people I know who didn't serve in a combat capacity, but they certainly served their country. A good friend of mine, Harold Westfall. Harold was in the Air Force. He served as a security police officer in the Air Force. Scott Christensen. Scott was a Navy rescue diver. He was the guy that jumped out of helicopters to save people when they were drowning. Jeff Taylor was in the Army. Tom Hodge was in the Army. My friend James Lewis, who's a police officer in Louisiana, was in the National Guard. City police officer Jeff Harbridge, who's a retired officer now, continues to work for the Concerns of Police Survivors, was in the Coast Guard. These individuals, whether they served on the front line, whether they served in support, whether they served in times of peace, all served to protect our freedom. We should thank them not only on Veterans Day, but every day. If you see someone, whether they're an old, grizzled veteran or a young man, wearing anything that signifies that they were a veteran, go out of your way and thank them. It'll make their day, and it's the thanks that they deserve. So let's not make just one day a year Veterans Day. Be thankful every day for those veterans who gave of themselves to serve our country and protect our freedoms. Until next time, this is Keith Helwig. If you like my videos, please hit the red subscribe button. Stay safe and watch your back.